Bloodied, he staggered through a parking lot. Nearby, the body of a little girl lay motionless, the signs of violence brutally apparent. She was Xiomara, just 9 years old. The person she cherished most turned out to be her killer. And when the truth of what he had done for months came to light, everyone was left in shock. How could the person they trusted most become the most cruel of aggressors? Xiomara González Fernández was born on June 12, 2002, to a large Latino family in Long Beach, California. She was the fourth of 6 children born to Graciela Fernández. The first 3, including Xiomara, were from Graciela's first marriage. The 2 youngest daughters came later after their mother began a new relationship with a man named Jacinto Trujillo. At the time of the events that would soon unfold, Jacinto was 31, and Graciela had just turned 40. He also came from a Latino-American family and had been in a stable relationship with Graciela for over 8 years. Although Jacinto was not Xiomara's biological father, he had raised her since she was a toddler. For as long as she could remember, according to close family members, the two shared a close and affectionate bond. The little girl loved him deeply and considered him her father in every sense, calling him Dad with complete naturalness. In 2012, Xiomara was in the 4th grade. Her teachers and classmates described her as a happy, vibrant child with an outgoing personality and a gift for conversation. She was an active participant in class, always eager to talk. A year earlier, Xiomara had learned that Jacinto was not her biological father. However, as she told both friends and teachers, this revelation changed nothing about how she felt. She said she loved him just the same and would always see him as her true father. Her attitude remained unchanged. She was the same affectionate, optimistic, and expressive girl she had always been. Alma Tavares, Graciela's second daughter and Xiomara's older sister, clearly recalled that everyone at home used to say Xiomara was Daddy's girl. The nickname arose precisely because she and Jacinto shared such a special bond, a relationship of trust and affection that was obvious to everyone. Alma also mentioned that Jacinto's eldest biological daughter, one of the 2 he had with Graciela, was very close with Xiomara. They had a tight sisterly bond, attending the same school and walking home together every afternoon. By the time of these events, Graciela's older children, including Alma, had moved out and started their own families. Only 4 girls remained at home: Xiomara, one of her older teenage sisters, and the 2 young daughters Graciela had with Jacinto. Everything in the home seemed normal. There were no visible signs of conflict, no outward indication that anything was wrong. But that apparent calm was shattered in the early months of 2012, when Jacinto lost his job. He began staying home to care for the younger girls while Graciela worked long hours to support the family. At first, he tried to stay strong, searching for employment and submitting applications. But despite his efforts, he found no work. As the weeks went by, his frustration became more and more evident. Jacinto started to withdraw from his daily responsibilities with the children. Close friends and family noticed a change in him. They saw him as withdrawn and disheartened, often silent with his gaze cast downward. He began taking the girls to relatives' houses more frequently, even at times when he could have cared for them himself. At first, no one was alarmed. They assumed he was going through a difficult emotional time. However, as days turned into weeks, certain behaviors began to raise suspicion. Some relatives who knew about his past noticed worrying signs. Jacinto had a history of drug use in his youth, though he seemed to have left that world behind years ago. Now, he was starting to exhibit attitudes reminiscent of that dark period. Several began to suspect he had relapsed. The situation at home grew increasingly chaotic. With Graciela forced to work long hours, she couldn't control what happened in her absence. Yet, Despite the obvious changes in Jacinto's behavior, no one could have anticipated what was about to happen. Alma later said she never imagined her stepfather could harm her little sister. She insisted their relationship had always been close and loving. He had always been affectionate and attentive, treating Xiomara with the love of a biological father. That's why no one in the family suspected that anything terrible could happen. No one was prepared for what was to come. On the night of Friday, April 27, 2012, Alma went to her mother's house. The plan was to pick up her two younger sisters, aged 9 and 7, for a camping trip the next day. But when she arrived, Alma sensed something was wrong. Xiomara wasn't there. She was told the girl had left earlier with her stepfather, Jacinto, under the pretense of visiting his parents. But it was late, and neither of them had returned. Despite her concern, Alma, who was pregnant at the time, left with her husband, deciding to wait until morning. But a sense of unease lingered. Around 4 a.m. on Saturday, Alma called her mother to see if Xiomara was back. On the other end of the line, a distraught Graciela confessed there was still no news. By then, the family feared the worst. Both were considered missing. Alma immediately canceled the trip, waiting for any news. The horrifying reality of what had actually occurred never crossed her mind. A few hours later, around 11 a.m. that same Saturday, the emergency line received a call from Long Beach. A woman named Nancy reported that she had made a horrifying discovery in the parking lot of the Los Altos United Methodist Church. From her car, she saw what looked like a body covered in blood. When she got closer, she realized with horror it was a small child. She checked for a pulse, for any sign of breath, but quickly saw that nothing could be done. The child was gone. She also reported that a few feet from the girl's body, there was an injured man, also covered in blood and with multiple visible wounds. Minutes after the desperate call, paramedics and police officers arrived. They confirmed the little girl was deceased. The man, however, had stable vital signs. He was conscious and able to speak. When officers asked him who the child was, he replied that she was one of his daughters. He then added that life had become very difficult for him, before trailing off into incoherent rambling. Soon after, authorities identified the deceased child. It was Xiomara González Fernández, the 9-year-old girl who had been missing since the previous night. The injured man found beside her was also identified. Jacinto Trujillo, her stepfather. Jacinto was taken to the hospital. Doctors confirmed he had several knife wounds, but after careful examination, they concluded the injuries were self-inflicted. Upon his release, he was immediately taken into police custody and formally charged with the 9-year-old's murder. Forensic reports confirmed that Xiomara had suffered severe injuries from a sharp object, concentrated on her upper body. Near her body, officers found a gray plastic container. On its surface, characters had been traced in blood as if written with a finger. Authorities did not publicly disclose the content of these messages, but witnesses at the scene claimed to have read offensive words, which were immediately associated with Jacinto. During subsequent interrogations, Jacinto quickly admitted his responsibility. He confessed that he had murdered Xiomara. He explained with chilling detachment that he had taken the girl out on the pretext of going for a walk. Once they were near the church parking lot, he pulled a razor blade from his pocket and suddenly attacked her. After leaving the badly wounded girl on the pavement, Jacinto walked a few feet away and attempted to take his own life with the same blade, but failed. It was shortly after this that Nancy found him. But Jacinto's confession did not end there. He also admitted to committing gravely inappropriate acts against the minor since November of 2011, explaining that he had done so repeatedly for several months. He said he began to fear that Xiomara would tell her mother. In his own words, he was terrified of being arrested and losing his family. So, driven by that fear, he decided to end the girl's life. For investigators, it was a profoundly shocking revelation. Tragically, subsequent forensic examinations confirmed physical signs consistent with Jacinto's confession. The news struck Graciela and her older children like a devastating blow. Until that moment, they had all trusted Jacinto completely. The most painful part was accepting that Xiomara, the one closest to him, was the one who suffered his betrayal. The knowledge that he had been the one to harm her was incomprehensible. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office filed formal charges against him, including murder with a special circumstance, committing the crime to silence a witness. Additionally, he was charged with 5 counts related to sexual misconduct. In 2017, Jacinto Trujillo, then 36 years old, was brought to trial. Although the prosecution initially considered seeking the death penalty, that option was later taken off the table. Finally, on September 16th of that year, the judge delivered the sentence. Jacinto was condemned to serve 41 years in prison for the murder of Xiomara. In addition to his prison term, the court ordered that his name be permanently registered as a sex offender, a legal designation that will follow him for the rest of his life. During the trial, Graciela, the child's mother and the accused's wife, took the stand. In her testimony, she admitted that she was in fact aware that Jacinto had relapsed into drug use. She acknowledged that on several occasions he had been left alone in the house with Xiomara, particularly during her other children's school hours or when she was out running errands. Looking back, Graciela now suspected it was precisely in those moments of solitude that Jacinto took the opportunity to commit his abuses. Graciela also shared a memory that, at the time, hadn't seemed alarming, but in light of the facts, was cast in a sinister new light. She recounted how every night Jacinto was the one who changed Xiomara's diaper. Despite being 9 years old, the little girl still wet the bed. This gesture, once seen as an act of care and responsibility, now felt deeply disturbing to her. After the tragedy, Graciela and her older children were confronted not only with their emotional grief, but also with the financial burden of arranging Xiomara's funeral. Without the necessary resources, they decided to launch their own fundraising campaign. For 2 consecutive weeks, the family washed cars on a city corner, hoping to raise enough money. Through their collective effort, they managed to gather $1,500, the exact amount they needed to cover all the funeral expenses. They also received special donations from a local radio station and from the Long Beach Police Department's homicide unit. These were gestures of solidarity that deeply touched the family. The murder of Xiomara, a little girl described by those who knew her as cheerful, sweet, and deeply loved, sent a shockwave through the community. As the details of the case became known, neighbors and citizens began leaving flowers, lit candles, photographs, and letters on a corner near the scene of the crime. With each passing day, this small, spontaneous altar grew. Decorative wooden planks were added, then a bird bath, and finally a stone bench, transforming the site into a sanctuary in her memory. In 2014, the city considered dismantling the memorial as it was on public property and partially obstructed the pedestrian walkway. However, after some deliberation, an agreement was reached with the adjacent church, which owned the neighboring land. Thanks to this arrangement, the sanctuary was moved just a few meters from its original location, onto the grounds of the church's parking lot. Today, the monument dedicated to Xiomara's memory, that space born spontaneously from tragedy, is enclosed by a metal fence, installed to provide greater security. The structure was put in place to preserve the site, protect it from harm, and ensure it remains a place of respect. For Graciela, this measure was a source of great comfort. She expressed feeling very happy, as that corner had become an emotional refuge, an intimate and meaningful place where she and her other children could visit often to remember their little girl, bring her flowers, sit in silence, or simply feel close to her memory. But that place, in addition to representing a love that never fades, is also a painful symbol. It is a constant reminder of a profound betrayal, the betrayal of a man who, instead of protecting, chose to harm. A being who, after years of pretending to be part of the family, betrayed everyone's trust, snatching away not only a child's innocence, but her very life. For many who followed the case, Jacinto Trujillo had always hidden his true nature. Those who rejected him after the truth came out believe he didn't enter Graciela's life for love, but for convenience. They believe he targeted a woman who was raising several children alone, with limited resources and without a solid family network. They believe he saw her as easy prey, an opportunity to insert himself into a home where he could move freely, slowly gain trust, and remain without raising suspicion. And for 8 years, that is exactly what he did. He lived with Graciela, presenting himself as an attentive, responsible, and kind man. He earned the respect of the older children who came to see him as a father figure. But above all, he managed to win the purest affection of all, that of Xiomara, the little girl who adored him, who called him Dad, who held for him a sincere and innocent love. For the family, even though legal justice has been served and the case is officially closed, it is not enough to close the wound of their grief. They say they will have to live their entire lives with the memory of Xiomara, of her constant laughter, of her kindness. It pains them to know that she blindly trusted the very person who would ultimately harm her. They must also carry the weight of having been deceived for so long. Jacinto convinced them all that he was a good man. He built that image with care only to use it for his own benefit. However, there are some who see the case from a different perspective. They suggest that Jacinto was a man grappling with deep depression and anxiety after losing his job, and that this turmoil led him to act in such a tragic way. Is it truly possible to know someone completely? What signs do you think were overlooked in this story? What are your thoughts on how the community responded in the aftermath? What did you learn, or what reflections did this story leave you with? We want to know your opinion. Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content.